Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain and Logistics podcast. I am your host, Stéphanie Moles-Rota, and I am the Managing Director, Benelux and France for Alcott Global. Our mission is to connect the supply chain ecosystem globally by bringing forward some of the most interesting leaders in the industry. I'm very happy today to have Ruth Beadle, Head of Supply Chain at Sanofi, who's joining me to talk about her career, what she's done, some of the key transformation. So Ruth, welcome.
Oh, nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Stephanie.
So shall we start with some of the key inflection points of your career? I mean, you have had an incredible career. I've seen you started as a logistic graduate. You've been a team leader in production side. You've been an HR leader.
Hard to
And
believe, I
now,
know.
yes, I can't believe it. Transformation, AI, and now head of supply chain of one of the major pharmaceutical company in the world.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, well, so firstly, I don't think I would have been able to make it to the role I'm in today if I hadn't had the journey I've had, which has been broad, as well as, working in multiple industries and multiple countries, and with different cultures. So I think all of those experiences help you get there. So a couple of inflection points. Um, I graduated in Dublin with business. I was fascinated with international business and also all of the statistics that go with transportation. Hard to believe. Hard to believe. It was exciting, but it was exciting for me. And I started in the UK, and it was a fantastic training where I was given, in the first 3 months, an overview of the entire company as a graduate trainee. So I spent a couple of weeks working in a pub. It was a brewery I worked in, a couple of weeks in manufacturing, working out on the road with technicians in technical services, as well as with commercial teams, right? So a full overview of the business, everything in between, to enable me to do my job, right? To understand the business and what role my role would play in that. So that is something I hold dear because it's an opportunity for all companies, really. If you're going to hire the best, you really need to share with them as much as you can about the business so that they can be effective in their future career. So that was one thing. And it was my first experience of deploying an ERP system. Far away from AI, I know, right? But it was my first experience of deploying JBA, as it was, right? And since then, I have done Oracle and I've done SAP and et cetera, et cetera. And that was a key inflection point for me because when you look to deploy a system like that, you really have to understand the business, how it operates in supply chain. Is it made to order? Do you have VMI inventory? Do you have consignment stock, et cetera, et cetera? How is pricing done? You really get a full overview of the business for it all to roll up and go effectively. So I think that was an inflection point for me. A second one, I would say, is I moved into a sister company, which was soft drinks. There's no money in soft drinks, right?
Yeah.
And you're competing against Coke. Well, we were. So it was Bridvik in the UK. We distributed Pepsi, which obviously was going against Coke, as well as our own brands. And my role was logistics. So I ran a distribution center and then two along the south coast of England. So very seasonal, right? And I learned an awful lot about customer service there, right? What, if you don't get your drinks or the machines don't work in a holiday resort where they have 6 weeks to sell it, you know all about it, right? So getting your inventory right, et cetera, was optimal. And then managing your team for the full year, where you're low in the winter, high in the summer, how do you manage that seasonality? So quite a few interesting learning points there for me. Before I moved back to Ireland, back in Ireland, well, I worked in manufacturing in England, but I moved back in Ireland and followed a similar path in Waterford Crystal. They make all of the crystal
Right.
glasses for brides.
Mm.
Most of the product went to the US via various markets, but eventually it all ended up for the American bride. So, and I ran a few different roles there. Again, SAP was implemented. Also managed a distribution center. It was the first experience I had really with managing a third party. So we had a third party operation in the US where all of the product, whether it was made in Waterford, where I live, or indeed in other parts of the world like India, China, Hungary, whatever, whether it was leather, glass, China, all of the gifts went into the US and it was turnkeyed into whatever packaging was suitable. So be that Bloomingdale's, Tiffany's, our own Waterford Crystal packaging, ready for the market. And that was a really interesting experience to work with a third party across purchasing, really across the value chain to do that. And finally, I moved to pharma 18 years ago, or just coming up for 18 years, because for those of you who don't know, in Ireland, pharma is massive, and device companies, 24 out of the top 25 companies have a base in Ireland. So huge shift, I suppose, in the employment opportunities that would bring. Very challenging to get into if you had never worked in it.
Yes.
So I was lucky to make a break where an opening came for me, and I moved to pharma. It was probably the most challenging step I took, not because the fundamentals of supply chain are any different, but importance of supply chain at that time in the company I started in, which was a small biotech, Genzyme, as it was, 10,000 people. It was really very patient-centric, which is excellent, of course, and very much about R&D, creating new products for patients, less about, say, inventory turns or etc.
Right.
So, customer service was high, but the cost perhaps wasn't as important at that time. So it was a big move for me to make. I had to learn a huge amount, right, about all of the different regulations and whatever. And I've had a career within what is now Sanofi, second to none, right? I've had opportunities working in manufacturing, I've worked in quality, I've deployed more systems. And when you work in an industry such as this, you really understand the difference you can make. We have, and this was an inflection point for me in about 2000. I joined it in 2007. 2008, we had a patient that came to visit, and that lady has just recently died, and she had a disease, an enzyme missing, which caused her, and it's a genetic problem, right? So your family would have it, etc. And she had a debilitating illness where her muscles went floppy, whether that was her, skeleton muscles or internal organs. And our drug, the drug we manufactured at the site I worked in, was at the time the only drug that would make a difference to her life, i.e., make her life bearable. It was never going to cure her. And when you listen to somebody speak about how they have to manage their daily life, when you see them in person, right, they can't get out of a wheelchair, and you think, wow, the choices I make are really impactful now, right? You know, I know the pharma industry gets a lot of bad press, etc. But I can tell you, when you look into the eyes, and I've seen patients then over the years, mothers and children, right? People mothers who can't keep down a job because they have to bring their child to an infusion center every 2 weeks or so, right? So really challenging basic things that you'd expect to do every day yourself, you or I would do. And you look at these people and the way they carry their cross, and you say, I can help these people. And that was a huge inflection point for me, which is why I stayed. So
Oh,
I don't know, does that cover
yeah, for
Stephanie?
sure, for sure. And I love it. It's funny how, especially, I mean, you've put tremendous amount of hours, right? So it's not like a 9 to 5 job.
No, it's not a nine to
Knowing
five job. No.
knowing that you have that patient in mind through
Mm.
hard times and being able to channel that extra purpose, I can imagine with your teams makes a difference. Yeah. And we cannot all say the same. If you're in the soft drinks, especially, it's very sugary.
It's not good for you now, right? But no, but for sure, I mean, to have that focus set you apart. And another thing I would say is because of my background, my earlier half of my career, I had the discipline, I had the profession where I was actually I had a very strong customer service background, with good business sense, et cetera, because of the various businesses I'd worked in. You know, really, when you put the two of them together, you can become very disruptive.
Right.
Okay. And we in Sanofi now, certainly, for those that don't know, Sanofi has been a company of acquisitions over 50 years, 52, I think, years, 300 acquisitions, multiple companies, of which we all have our own culture. And over the last 5 or 6 years has been on a journey to modernize really at scale and at pace to be ready for growth. And it's been a privilege to be a part of that, right? And because of the combination of experience I've had and
Right.
having grown up then within Sanofi, I had the opportunity and the inspiration with the patients to make a difference.
So what would you say in you're mentioning especially the last 5 to 6 years, right?
Hmm.
Because the speed of change is incredible.
Hmm.
What would you say are the key topics in that transformation that you had to manage? And what have some of the challenges you still may be there, and some of the proud moments in the
Hmm.
recent years?
So if I go to the last 3 years when I'm in this role, it was unifying. The first step was to really unify people behind a strategy or a vision that where people could buy into it, and as the company was transforming, the supply chain would actually serve the transformation, right? So a supply chain that is agile, that as we introduce and launch products. I mean, we have a very ambitious launch pipeline, 40 different indications over the next number of years, right? So a hugely ambitious launch pipeline. And also we're altering the portfolio for some of our legacy businesses. And when you look at that and you have to create a supply chain that can manage both, and not knowing where the timing of any of those changes will happen, because will the launches come on time? We hope they do. But they're a long time in the making and they're not guaranteed. Somebody else could pip you to the post. So I think creating that strategy across people, process, systems, standardizing. Remember what I said, we're a company of acquisitions. So standardizing our processes, standardizing our data. Are we there? No. Are we significantly better than we were? Absolutely. Implementing Kinaxis, our advanced planning system, is there for 80+% of end-to-end of the sales of the company now, right? So from demand planning right the way through to the manufacturing sites, right? Creating a digital value stream map within 8 months of all of the inventory that the company has. So, and building the capabilities of a better team, right? Capabilities that will be future ready. And whilst you always have to, that journey never ends, right?
Never.
But whilst you have to continually update that, again, 3 years on, I'm delighted with the progress we've made.
Well, and it's being recognized
It has been
worldwide.
recognized. Well,
Yeah.
internally, we've made huge improvements in service. We've made huge improvement in having the inventory in the right place to ensure our sales are maximized, and we have products in place for our patients. We are improving our forecast accuracy. We've a lovely partnership with McLaren. We have a race. It's really kind of fun and innovative, where we align finance, supply chain, and the commercial team to forecast in the same way, right? And that's making a massive difference. So that's internally, and we've been recognized for the innovation we've brought around some of the AI that we've brought within Sanofi, right? So forecasting our low inventory risks, looking at our inventory picture, I mentioned that already. Our metrics are for on time and full, etc., are all in the system. So, and of course, the supply chain links everything. But externally, we've also been recognized
Right.
by Gartner. We've jumped 20 places in the 3 years that we were there, and hopefully this year we'll make a bigger jump again. And we've been recognized by Kinaxis. We've won one of their excellence awards recently, which is about linking our strategy with obviously systems, right? And the deployment of such. So good progress. It's a work in progress, right? We've more to do, but isn't that what's exciting?
It's very impressive. I've seen so many companies. I mean, implementing a system, the system is just like, it's the infrastructure, right? But if you don't ride the train, if you,
Yeah.
yeah, well, you've got a beautiful new toy nobody's using. So anything you would, mention to our listeners about what made it so successful at Sanofi? Because funny enough, yesterday I was talking to somebody in a very different industry, in a very different part of the world, and they say we're still benchmarking against the best, and we know Sanofi is still ahead of us. Yeah. So
Excellent.
many people mention you as a benchmark or where to go. So this is quite an accomplishment, right? So
Well, yeah, it's great to hear, right? So what we did was, I told you, we set out our ambition, we put in place a roadmap, and then the roadmap measure on one page. And I'm sorry I didn't patent the one page. So so on one side it had a qualitative assessment, kind of a spider graph that we measure every quarter. Where are we? Where do we want to be, right? So we target that across, people, process, systems. So, demand planning, IBP, systems rollout, etc. And then on the right-hand side, very simple 5 metrics, service, inventory, cost to serve, destruction, forecast accuracy. Where are we? Where is the best in class? Where are we going to be next quarter? Right. So we absolutely, now we don't always get there, right?
yeah,
But it's having absolute clarity on the impact and the outcome that's making a difference helps you reorient the resource that's required to execute it or reinvest. I mean, the deployment of Kinaxis has been probably the most challenging part of our journey, not on the demand side and the market side, but actually to roll it out across our manufacturing sites and change the process. It's a complicated system. The data needs to be right. You need to do it all of the time, right? It changes how you work.
right.
That
Right.
change part has been challenging and has required we have not met some of our ambitions, but we've met them now, right? Because we kept them up there and tried to address some of the challenges that people were facing
Yeah.
in using the system.
So it's very much of a discipline, resilience, and change management, right? Getting the
Change management.
people along and keeping them engaged, I can imagine, because it's not every day an easy ride.
I've got a great team. Right, number one, always hire people better than yourself.
Yeah.
That's a very
Right.
smart thing to do. Okay, so that's probably my greatest advice to anybody, including myself.
Right.
Um, as part of this transformation, I hired well, we had a lady, a young lady who was working in international supply chain. I spotted her in a talent management meeting, and I asked her would she lead our change and comms journey for the roadmap. So she was permanently dedicated to that. I just created the position. I didn't replace her in her role. I just moved her role. Why? Because she had the right disposition. She's super, super engaging, understood the business, and she created then a tribe of influencers,
So
right? Of other
so
people
cool.
who
Yeah.
would actually help carry the journey. Maybe about 30 people across all of the different, global footprint that we have and across all of the different disciplines that we have, and to help engage and keep the drumbeat. And that was monitored with lots of things, or, they had lots of impacts. We had supply chain star awards, and
Right.
that they
Right.
ran. We had lots of feedback sessions, right? Because it's not just one-way cascade, routine town halls, big ones, small ones that
Right.
would fit to their size, newsletters, LinkedIn posts, everything that would, and we have an internal LinkedIn. It's not LinkedIn, but, internal type of a thing to keep it alive. And I don't know, did you know, but Sanofi sponsored the Olympics, or one of the sponsors, and we linked each of our disciplines an Olympic sport,
Oh,
right? So we
cool.
try to create some
Yeah. Create
fun.
a hype and some fun and some reward and some, yeah.
Yeah,
So
let's be honest. What we were doing was foundational, let's
right,
call it, right? Foundational, and it's now modernizing for sure and accelerating, right? And that was always the journey. So you have to get people excited about it.
right. And then if you remember who you do it for. So once you add what you said previously and you link it to, but why do we do it? And it's
Yeah,
for
a
that
greater
reason.
purpose. Yeah, it's a greater purpose, right? So the hardship, look, let's be honest. I'm sure not everybody would say, "Wow, this has been a fabulous journey," right? Okay, I think you've got to be humble in it, okay? But we try to listen and engage as
Right.
many people on the journey as we could, and that journey is how can we be better for our patients, right? So it's not about making the best process; it's about making the best process that's going to make a difference. Yeah,
And for your company and your environment. Because as you
exactly.
said before, which is, by the way, very, very difficult to do, changing industry is not always easy.
Yeah.
And not every industry requires the same tools or the same processes. Even though the basics are the same,
Mm.
you need to adapt also to what is your specific need.
For sure, for sure. And in selecting the team that I have now, I've well, the size of the team is reduced. I talk about directly my leadership team, but the whole thing cascades. But I have a mix of male, female, obviously, but also of experience. So a number of the people that I have on my team were promoted from within other parts of the organization, of the supply chain organization, or indeed we took some people from commercial. I took people from other industries. Two came from different industries externally, and one person came from another pharma company. So having different experiences, different age profiles, different
Right.
everything. Having a young female, all young females who are under 30, is not going to be the right solution for everything. You need to have, I think, a range of experience, a range of diversity, and
Right.
that's representative of society
Yeah.
if you're really going to carry the crowd.
So you totally, talking about diversity, you
Mm.
totally embrace diversity and you represent diversity from the backgrounds, from that multicultural, but also having been female supply chain leader very early on, leading production team, and any anecdote, anything you want to share. I mean, not everybody has them, but it's always nice to hear things you overcame or advice you could give.
Yeah, I've got to say it was a privilege leading teams, like being a team leader. I was a team leader in a warehouse in Scotland, right, in a wines and spirits distribution center. I mean, right,
That's
that was tough.
very
I was a
male
team.
dominated.
Oh, fully male dominated. I was a team leader in manufacturing, working 3-shift operation in production, and I didn't have the expertise, right? Okay, I was young. I was relatively young. They were you know, you kind of got to jump in. They were great, great learning experiences, and you know what, Stephanie, people in my experience, people who work in those roles are critical. They're absolutely critical. They believe in the what needs to be done, and they're very quick to say this is helping me or this is not helping me. And you, as a leader, you know, you need to understand that. And I try. I don't get the opportunity as often as I would like anymore, but to reconnect myself with people like who are frontline people,
Right.
right? Because the front line actually understand, this new system, it doesn't work. My barcode scanner doesn't work, right? It doesn't make me faster, it makes me slower, right? And you get real feedback and it's unfiltered. And the higher you go, the less of it you hear.
Right.
And I really value that face-to-face interaction where people are very authentic.
It is so critical and so often forgotten.
Mm.
And then you create a screen, a mirage, or something that nobody can understand, and people forget what you do it for.
Mm.
So Any advice you would give to your younger self? So looking back at, that amazing, and it's only the beginning, career that you've had so far.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, I will say was given a lot of breaks by different sponsors along the way who I didn't even recognize as sponsors. I didn't even know what sponsors were. But and I would, as a person now, which isn't answering your question, which I'll come to, I would say I try and do more of that now than perhaps I would have done if I hadn't had the experience myself. So what do I mean by that? Um, Going along the way, at a time when nobody was allowed to work remotely or part-time, as you were progressing your career, it was kind of frowned upon. Things have changed now, I know. But it was male people when I had my young kids who said, do you know what? Why don't you work from home? Why don't you work from home, right? And gave me an opportunity and found me a job, right? When I said I was going to leave because I couldn't manage a commute or whatever. And a male boss I had said, don't leave. We'll find something that supports you for this moment, right?
So
And I
cool.
think having that is super, right? And I had that a few times through my career. But my advice for my younger self, and I have three younger daughters, right? So maybe I give them the advice, right? I would have given my younger self, which is believe, you know, you have it all at your feet. Don't be arrogant, of course, you got to be humble, you got to go and experience, try many different things, but believe that you can. I think too many people mentally block themselves. And I myself had that experience um probably about 2013, no, what, maybe 2012, 2013. I was thinking, well, this is it, I'm now at the peak of my career because, you know, I've I've set out to do everything I wanted to do, and I have achieved a lot, and I don't want to disrupt my family life, and whatever. And a lady spoke to me, and she said, "You're locking yourself up." Uh, And I said, "What?" And she said, "You're binding yourself up. Where do you really want to be? Where do you really, really want to be?" And with kind of all freedom, and write it down. She said, "And you know what? Put yourself on the train to get to that destination. You can choose at any time to get off the train." And I thought, wow. And I followed that, and I've given that advice to my own kids and to other people who work with me because it was so impactful. Because I was saying, well, this is it now, right? I love it. It's not that it's comfortable, but it's something that I can keep a whole thing in my life. And I took that advice, and look where I am now, a long way on. Maybe older, definitely older, but a long way.
Oh, unbelievable. And it's a quote we'll definitely use, and I will remember. You can, get on the train and you can choose to step out anytime. We often think this is, if we take that path, this will be forever and it will define the rest of our existence. But it doesn't.
No,
And
and
don't
now,
limit yourself. Don't lock yourself up. Wow.
and
So
now in today's society, it's much and much easier to do it,
right.
So
Yes. Yeah.
embrace it.
Embrace it and believe that you can, because we are definitely so dependent on our own mental belief. If we don't believe, we keep ourselves small. Thank you so much, Ruth. It's a true pleasure having you with us, and I'm convinced our listeners will also love listening and reaching out maybe to hear more about the journey ahead. And congratulations on everything you've done so far. Looking forward to keeping the connection.
Okay, take care. Thank you, Stephanie.
Once again, this is Stéphanie Moles-Rota. Thank you so much for listening to this Leaders in Supply Chain podcast episode. If you find it interesting, head over to alcottglobal.com and click on the podcast section to get all the details and show notes. And if you want to stay in the loop with new episodes and updates, Be sure to subscribe to our mailing list. If you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, or Amazon Music, we'd love it if you could leave us a review. 5 stars are always appreciated and really help keep things running smoothly. And of course, share this with anyone you think might enjoy it. Follow us on LinkedIn for the latest updates and behind-the-scenes content. If you have ideas for future guests or topics you'd love to hear about, drop us a message. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Contact us if you're looking for top executive to help transform your supply chain or logistics. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.